Hi, everybody. This is Joanne Manister, Science Goddess on Twitter, and we are here at Read Science with my co-host, Jeff Schomeyer, and something's going on back here. Hold on. Sorry. Okay. Something happened in the background. Anyway, so, sorry to interrupt. And more importantly, we are here with our guest, Dr. Liam Drew, who's all the way in England. England?
Yes,
Britain?
England, yes.
Okay, I was like, uh-oh, what if you're somewhere else in the UK and I was wrong? So, so Liam, welcome to the show. And if you'd say hi, I'll introduce your book after that.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on, Joanne and Jeff.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about Liam's book, I, Mammal, the story of what makes us mammals. And we chose this day because today, July 30th, 2019, is the paperback book release in the United States. So presumably your paperback was released in the UK recently?
Yes, it came out 2 months ago. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's always interesting how that works. So, well, I will go ahead and read Liam's bio, and we'll let Jeff start with a question. So Liam Drew is a writer, former neurobiologist, and mammal. You're not a former mammal, are you?
No. Important, I think.
He has a PhD in sensory biology from the University College London and spent 12 years researching schizophrenia, pain, and the birth of new neurons in the adult mammalian brain at Columbia University, New York, and at UCL. His writing has appeared in all the places our guests tend to write: Nature, New Scientist, Slate, and The Guardian. He lives in Kent with his wife and 2 daughters, and your daughters figure prominently in your book, or at least one of them does.
I do, yes.
Yes. All right. Jeff usually begins with a question.
Okay. So, Dr. Drew, I was trying to think of the big question to start, I think, is where we would, rather than build up from the bottom. And it was hard to find just a place because there are so many entry points in the book, which I take as a good thing. But the genesis of this book involves an amusing story, which I think at least it's amusing now, but it was painful at the time. And I'm happy if you want to start by telling that story briefly. But the bigger question that I was thinking about, and this came after I'd read the whole book, was I get the impression from reading it that researching it and writing it and thinking about it was a profound journey for you, both discovering about the science and putting that together, but also a personal journey for you. I felt like you felt different at the end than you did at the beginning. And now I'm thinking, now that you're nearer the end of the journey, what significance did you find in trying to answer the question, what is a mammal?
Right.
This is easy, right?
Yes. So I guess, yeah, let me take those sort of 3 bits, and I will tell the amusing story. Yes, the book owes its existence to a misdirected soccer ball. As we're in America, I'll call it a soccer ball. I was playing soccer I was in New York at Columbia doing my neuroscience research. I'm playing 5-a-side soccer. And yes, a football hit me between the legs in that sort of painful male-only piece of anatomy, the externalized genitals that I have alongside many other mammals. And the next day, after I sort of recovered from this shock, I was complaining about it to my girlfriend, my now wife, and she said, "Well, it's ridiculous. You have your genitals on the outside." And I said, "Oh, it's to keep them cool. We all know that." But then I sort of started researching it. And I thought, well, why do we have to keep them cool? And it was just sort of one of those internet sort of wormholes that I went down, sort of looking into why they would need to be cooler. And then it turns out that actually there's this sort of, not a vast number, but a small number of evolutionary biologists who have looked into this question and formulated various theories about it. And I kind of thought, well, this could be an interesting magazine article. And I was taking writing classes in the evening, and so I wrote this article, and then I had to shop it around to various outlets. and had some sort of amused and bemused rejection letters. And then finally, Laura Helmuth at Slate, who was at Slate at the time, now at the Washington Post, she took a chance on it, and she liked it very much, published it. And then I was looking at my LinkedIn profile, and it had it tells you who's viewed your profile, and it had commissioning editor from Bloomsbury there. And I was like, no, don't think anything of that. 2 days later, I got a very looking back, monumental email from Julie Bailey at Bloomsbury saying she'd like the essay. Have I ever considered writing a book? They were launching the Sigma imprint at the time. And so this sort of segues into that your second sort of part of that question about it being a fairly profound journey for me. When this email landed in my inbox, I'd recently become a father, so there'd been no lasting terminal damage done by the soccer ball, thankfully. And I was sort of going through that very profound change that we go through as parents. And I'd also, I think it just very much connected me to my biological self, this whole process, especially as you said, my daughters feature prominently in the book, and my eldest had been premature, and again that had sort of been a very just profoundly biological experience. I think I was sort of guilty of living in my head and considering myself a walking intellect rather than a walking body. And there was various aspects of the process of becoming a parent that which actually only mammals go through. And so after Julie had written to me, this sort of the idea came very quickly to sort of just consider oneself as a biological entity at a sort of more profound biological level, and sort of mammalianness seemed to tie it together. So obviously the provision of milk, but a baby growing in a womb, obviously. And I started thinking, well, maybe I could sort of do a collection of essays about the various traits that make a mammal, and sort of just throw all those in a book, and that would count as a book. And then it was interesting. It was nice to hear you say that you felt I was a different person at the end of the book than I was at the beginning, because I think I was. And the sort of challenge after so Bloomsbury accepted that proposal, and then I went off to write it, and I thought, well, how am I going to order these chapters? And so the idea that I ended up settling on was to sort of take them one by one in the order that they would occur in a mammalian life. So that meant I could put the sort of externalized male genitalia at the start, and then go through, how mammals reproduce, how the babies develop in placental mammals in a womb with a placenta, and sort of obviously touch upon other mammalian forms of reproduction, and then the provision of milk and how parents bond with their offspring and how the two generations overlap, which is a really fundamental part of mammalian biology. And then to sort of look at sort of the growing body, warm-bloodedness, and intellect.
Sensory and eating and things like that. And I think you said you were considering, do I want to talk about what showed up evolutionarily first, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was
different ways to approach this topic.
Yeah, there was another big question or a big point that I really liked about the book that is hard to get at, but the fact that it's hard to get at is part of the point. And you got to it when you were discussing, sort of the big summary chapter at the end where you're looking back on everything. And we've had big topics like descended testicles were big. Who invented the scrotum? We had the invention of mammary glands. We had an amazing chapter on the placenta that I never knew was nearly so interesting. Endothermy was excellent. So there were all these topics. And when you get to the end, I don't know how much of this you found out from grappling with the writing, but the whole book expresses the fact that, especially evolutionarily, the way these things come about are not as individual traits, but as this complicated network that moves along a step here and a step there and takes everything along with it, which also says is almost is a fantastic allegory for how science itself works. And so, I got to the end and all of that was sort of coming at me, and I thought, wow, this, and that's, you know, why I decided this seemed like a profound journey, was you have to go on the journey through the entire book to see that it was very hard to talk about these things as though they're independent when they're all so intimately connected this way.
Yes.
I don't know if that's a question, but you know, it did all of these things, which I think is nice. And well, they are all connected. I mean, that's just one of the great things that comes out of reading the book, is almost experiencing how connected they are.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'll take it as a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, no, that was for me sort of intellectually one of the most interesting things, because you know, I'd worked as an academic scientist for 15 years or so, and you know, as a biologist in academia, you often get very focused in on a small thing, and we're all in our separate departments, and we're familiar with sort of hospitals having wards that deal with, you know, livers in one ward, kidneys in the other, brain in another. And so that sort of parcelation of different aspects of biology is and was very prominent. I think it's maybe becoming less so. But yes, I mean, I think as each chapter went by, I was sort of wary that one was blurring into another. So, you know, if you talk about the evolution of the mammary gland, you have to also consider the evolution of lips and a baby with a secondary palate, which allows it to suckle and breathe at the same time. Or sort of just being a warm-blooded animal, an endothermic animal, having to have the ability to gather lots of food and so be a good hunter. So yeah, so I was sort of aware of it, and I sort of, I say this in the final chapter, but I was keeping a little diagram with these lines on it.
Yes.
But then at some point in the researching the book, I came across Tom Kemp's work at Oxford University, who is, you know, the sort of doyen of mammalian evolution, a paleontologist who's written about many sort of ancient mammals, and he has a diagram like this, which is just truly extensive, and it's just everything is linked, and he has this wonderful image of sort of traits evolving. You know, you don't get to add one on. You don't get to just sort of bolt, you know, mammary glands on a body. You don't get to put a new ear on a body. Everything is attached, and he sort of says, think of the traits as sort of walking along in a line where everyone has to hold hands. So and no one can sort of move ahead of the rest to such an extent that the hands become unclasped. And so Joanne, you mentioned, you know, could I have arranged the book sort of, you know, which trait appeared first in time? And that sort of became evident that I couldn't, because they necessarily evolve in parallel, and you have to have a bit of one to get a bit of another, and so they're all moving in parallel. And so the sort of understanding of an animal or of an organism, one has to think of all the parts in a web and all the interdependencies between them. That was very interesting to sort of just think about biology in that way.
Is this the next big front in the popular understanding of evolutionary biology? I mean, people almost have, you know, some idea of genes, and then we spent decades with, you know, animals are made up of traits, and each one has a gene, and well, how do they get these? Well, some gene mutated, and it's just, oh, I'd hate to say complicated, but it's a lot richer than that. And going through the story this way and seeing all these connections surely will help understand that there is this network involved, and that these things are all of these, what we think of as traits, moving along and feeding back into each other to get to a new spot.
Yeah, I mean, definitely people are thinking more along these lines now, and sort of, yeah, feedback loops and how an animal sort of creates its own. You know, we used to think of sort of the animal and its environment as sort of distinct entities. Now people, you know, there's evolutionary models where we're sort of thinking about how the animal creates its own environment. You know, they're not independent factors. And certainly gene networks and the sort of repurposing of genes, you know, obviously one of the big shocks of the sequence in the genome was how few genes we had. And then it was sort of understanding that gene regulation and using same genes for multiple traits was obviously how biology operates. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot more systems thinking, and it's funny. I think subsystems biology seems to be they call themselves systems biology without being significantly different from old biology. It's a buzzword, but no, I think that other people definitely are thinking bigger picture instead of just sort of looking at one piece at a time. People are trying to think in a systems-oriented way.
Well, now you mentioned several times the platypus, the monotremes, and yeah, just how you've grown to love these. So for those who haven't read the book, do you want to share a little bit, give them a teaser of how much to learn about monotremes in the book?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I did. There's another recurring theme. So obviously the monotremes are the iconic duck-billed platypus, and then the 4 species of echidnas, the spiny anteaters that live down in Australia and thereabouts, with the platypus as well. And these are the 5 species of mammals that lay eggs. And we kind of all know that, most people know that they lay eggs, and this is a bit of an anomaly. And so once you sort of understand the sort of the phylogeny, the family tree of mammals, you learn that the monotremes sort of branched off early in the evolution of mammals. So of all surviving mammals, you've kind of got the placental mammals, of which there's about 5,000, marsupials, which you have about 400 of, and the monotremes, of which you have 5. And so there's this sort of little straggly branch that came off. About 160 million.
You've got a lovely end paper, and there's the monotremes, but this is the whole mammal. Well, not the whole tree, but a really good representation of mammals. But here's the monotremes.
Yeah,
branched up quite.
That's sort of the point in the middle. That's sort of Y point, the point of the Y. Yeah, so we can use the sort of monotremes to infer what the shared ancestor of monotremes and all other mammals would have been like. And so whenever you go to the monotreme, you so often just find these little intermittent aspects of biology. So if you're asking how did mammary glands evolve, it's interesting to go to a platypus and discover that they have milk, and it's very much like mammalian milk, but they have no nipples. So they're sort of sweating milk from their torsos. If you look at the way they maintain their body temperatures, they are warm-blooded, but their temperature is less high than other endothermic mammals, and it's less tightly regulated. And their eggs are fascinating. So their eggs, although they're eggs and they come out of a little shell, not a hard shell, but they're very unlike reptile eggs and birds' eggs. They actually grow after they've been fertilized. So they're actually absorbing nutrients from the mother into the egg within the body of the mother, and that's sort of like what a placenta does, right? So it's not that. So if you take a chicken egg, the mother puts all the energy into the egg, whether it's fertilized or not, it doesn't matter. That's the resources she sets aside for a young chick. Whereas the platypus egg is fertilized, it's very small, but then it grows by absorbing nutrients. And that's kind of like the starting point for a placenta. So there's just so many of those examples. And then when you actually look at the history of naturalists and zoologists looking at the platypus, it's this wonderful story of a skin of a platypus being sent from Australia just as they're founding the Sydney penal colonies. And just the Europeans just not knowing what the hell to make of it. And debates going on for decades about what this animal must be about, all based upon dead animals, and not really trusting anyone in Australia, and certainly not trusting the locals who knew the animal very well. So yeah, that was a fun chapter to write.
Well, there was that huge controversy for a long time about whether platypus even laid eggs or not, right? Yeah, and you just mentioned this, and your summary observation was a fascinating fact of saying that egg-laying mothers expend most of their resources before laying the egg, before the offspring's born, and that placental mothers expend most of their resources after the child is born, which is interesting. And that leads me to one observation when I've stop people on the street and say, hey, here's a great book you need to read, one of the things I tend to say.
Do you, Jeff? I want to see this.
Well, yes, I'd rather do, although it's often at the Taco Bell too. But I tell them that I've never seen interesting facts, so many interesting facts deployed so densely in such an interesting way as you've managed. Just like, because, on the one hand, I want to say, look at all of these fascinating facts. And that would normally make people think of the most boring science books they've ever had to read. And so if you could explain your secret for, covering all of these fascinating facts, but telling compelling stories with them, I don't know. And the best I could come up with is that you almost always use a fact to support an idea when you're writing. And I think that may be the secret, is that the facts are always in aid of a bigger idea going on. But that was a nice trick.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've analyzed my writing as yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the lovely thing about writing this book was that there are just so many great facts, and people love this, right? It's just wonderful to hear about tenrics that hibernate for 9 months a year, or and just that seals have milk that's like sort of fishy mayonnaise. So there was always it was a joy to research the book, because I would come across so many of these facts. But and I kind of just kept wanting to shove them in. You're right, but the idea was always to have a central narrative there around which they were organized. So yeah,
and yet the facts are fun. They're worthwhile. And just after we were talking to you, and you said, yes, I do a program with you, remember, I saw this cartoon someplace that had in the first panel a picture of the father getting his daughter ready for bed, and he was reading aloud to her. And the book, I recognized the cover, and he's saying something to her like, did you know that anteaters did this? And I thought, and now I know why he used that in the book, because it's fun. You can't read this book near other people without sharing interesting facts a little more frequently than they might like.
It's funny. Yeah, no, you're not the first person to say that. Yeah, I love the fact that that's happening. I love the idea of sort of people with other people, if it's their partner, friends, or daughter. Yeah, just suddenly stopping and say, "Did you know?" That's great. But the cartoon you saw was probably my favorite thing that's come out of the book. Was I got an email from this very talented comic book writer, Mike Dawson, saying he loved my book. Would I mind him drawing a comic about it? And he wrote. It's this very warm comic that he wrote about how he shared the book with his daughter. That was like their bedtime reading together. That was fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, it was. I was delighted by that.
So, given all these facts and this information, you're already a biologist, but it's not. This seems like, oh, this should be foundational for all biologists, but not always, right? Sometimes we take a track that's more molecular, and then we sort of forget the basic roots of being a mammal. So, when you were researching, what was the most interesting concept? And then we can ask you your favorite fact, but the most interesting sort of concept of maybe how something evolved that you didn't know or were reminded of, or something that's happened in recent years that you didn't know, like, at the beginning of your academic journey.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I mean, much of it was very interesting to me. And I had read sort of Richard Dawkins and Stephen Jay Gould's books as a teenager. Mm-hmm. Didn't realize quite how oppositional they were whilst I was being inspired by them. So evolution had been a big route in for me. But then I decided to pursue neuroscience as my academic career. And I really genuinely find an evolutionary standpoint is quite absent in academic neuroscience. I mean, there's a corner of it which is interested in it. And I think there's really interesting research that's come out of that. But I feel that I spent too much of my career with this sort of idea that a mouse was a mini monkey and that was a mini human, and that, that we could just think about them as archetypal animals, versions of one another. And also just the sort of the metaphor as brain as computer, and we're going to solve it by this sort of computational approach was very dominant. And so I just really liked thinking from the sort of grappling with thinking from an evolutionary perspective and what that brought to these questions, which I just found have been very absent. And I feel that there's so much rich data. We talk about sort of just amusing facts about different species, but actually just sort of seeing how different species or different lineages have solved biological problems can be so enlightening. And I just didn't feel that had been. I didn't feel like it had been, and I still don't think it is used enough by academic neuroscientists.
So maybe neuroscientists aren't living by that maxim that things in biology only make sense in light of evolution, right? They've somehow been able to disengage from that central saying. Who said that? My brain is forgetting.
I've read it enough times.
That's okay.
No, I'm going to butcher his surname if I say
that's
that.
Okay. In the light of evolution, I
think it must be true, because the book we're talking about now made such good sense of it that way.
Yes. His name is easy to butcher. I don't even want Dobzhansky.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. A 1973 essay by evolutionary biologist Theo. Let's shorten it to Theo Dobzhansky. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a lot of science you can do and not understand the evolution, but I think it makes it much more interesting.
Yeah. I don't want to sit here and sort of slag off all of neuroscience either.
Yes.
I think there is a bit of a research. I think things are changing a little bit. I mean, I think, and it's sort of coming with that systems biology perspective as well, I think, a little bit. And certainly.
But even in the midst of all of this evolutionary biology, there's a lot of not forced, but we learn a lot about social conventions and things when we say, gosh, I didn't know that, and this is me, I didn't know the placenta could be nearly so interesting. What is the bias against it, and why has it not been studied? And seeing how, Victorian biases influenced neurobiology research in brains, and understanding how the brain worked and things. There's an awful lot of social bias, which I hope doesn't shock people too much. The science does have it, but we try to find a way around it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it was I mean, that was what I remember. One striking recent paper. I mean, so there's a chapter on how mammals reproduce, and there's lots of amusing papers out there about. Well, they're not amusing; they're serious scientific papers. An amusing fact about penises, and the papers on vaginas just don't exist, and so someone sort of catalogued it, and there's this massive bias towards working on males, and traditionally, yes, biologists, and who knows if it's sort of from the subconsciouses of the alpha males that were the evolutionary biologists of the 20th century, but sort of focused on males as these sort of big rutting, striding animals, and the females as rather passive recipients of, whose antlers were the biggest. And we're now obviously understanding that it's a lot more complicated than that, obviously, and sort of redressing the balance involves partially redressing the social biases as well.
And we're still having a tough time getting rid of shadows of the great chain of being, and humans are the only thinking animals. Humans are the only this or that, and it keeps turning out that they're not.
Quite. Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, neuroscience definitely, the great chain of being, neuroscience definitely was one of the sort of disciplines that seemed to hold on to that for the longest, this idea that brains just kind of got more and more complicated, and there is this very obvious.
And then finally we got humans.
Yes, exactly. And I think people are redressing that now. From studies that are appreciating how intelligent octopuses are, through just studying all animals are very intelligent. You know, they're not the same. Well, not all animals are intelligent, but
Crows. I'm fond of crows.
yes, crows are incredible. And just sort of accepting that their intelligence is a little bit different, but actually, and there's also just, you know, asking the right questions, doing the experiments the right way. So everyone always trains mice and monkeys to do tasks by giving them a little food reward if they get the puzzle right. And they tried doing this with some alligators once. And alligators eat, you know, once every 2 months, and so they didn't do.
That was a great fact in
Yes.
the book.
And then we offered them a warm and a cold chamber. Yeah, they just did it.
Since we've teased people, we need to be clear about that fact of rats versus alligators or crocodiles, whichever one it was, and what the story actually was. That's a leading question. So everyone thought, well, rats run mazes and they'll do it for food rewards and learn tasks. So let's take these alligators or crocodiles? Crocodiles.
I think it was alligators.
Okay, alligators, and let's have them do things and we'll reward them with food. And the alligators just sat there, obviously stupider than rats.
Exactly.
Until someone realized that alligators, as you've said, an interesting fact, only eat once or twice a year. And they're not motivated by meals every 3 minutes or whatever to learn tasks. And so a more open-minded experimenter offered them the chance to choose a warm spot to bask in for a while as a reward for learning a task. And by golly, they learned the tasks.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is a famous cartoon that, you know, asks everyone to climb a tree to demonstrate how smart they are, and the fish look bewildered.
That's true. So
a friend of mine is a marine biologist, and she's just written a book about her last book was about fish, and she ended on this sort of social life of fish. And you know, once people got down there and looked at them properly, they're doing some. You know, once you actually sit down and think what the behavior entails, and sort of, you know, the fact that they have memories of each other and they kind of behave differently around different fish according to their personalities. So yeah, sometimes it's just a question of looking. And
but you find these connections from some of the most curious facts. Like there are implications when you say, or this is an implication, saying that it's a curious fact that there aren't any or many green mammals. And then people might say, what does that have to do with evolutionary biology? Well, humans and many mammals don't see terribly well the color green because of the receptors that have evolved in their eyes to see other things. And that led me to ask, I was going to ask you, and yet, in almost every movie you watch, Martians are green. Do you think that's a significant bit of otherness?
That's a really good point. Something I've never ever thought about. Yeah, do you think it's sort of a deep mammalian longing?
It's very deep, yeah.
Yeah, to be green, we wish we were green. You know, so speaking of evolutionary biology, and it's probably the same in the UK, but in the US we have a large subset of the population that does not embrace evolution. Does not agree with it. Have you, now that your book's been out a year, have you encountered anybody who's read it and said, well, you know, it's cool about the mammals, but I'm not crazy about the fact you're talking about evolution?
Do you know what? I mean, I haven't. I don't know if that just means it hasn't sold well enough. I mean, I find it remarkable, but what? There's a chap on Twitter called who has the hand. I don't know if it's a chap or a lady, but there's a person on Twitter who has an account handle "Take That Darwin," who constantly retweets these ridiculous tweets that people write. And so you don't necessarily go on Twitter to get the sort of wisdom of the people, but whenever someone says, you know, if humans evolved from monkeys, why are monkeys still around?
Yes.
As if it's a gotcha that. You know, evolutionary biologists are suddenly going to think, "Oh yeah, never thought of that."
Yeah.
I think just part of writing this book was really just sort of I mean, I'm not addressing them, but it's just like to show how carefully people think about this. So there's
Yes.
characters in this book that, one chap has spent 50 years researching the evolution of milk and mammary glands and associated biology. It's just like the depth of thinking that goes into it and the rigor and just like how everything is considered, and how it forms a coherent whole. And of course we're disagreeing about things and it's being updated all the time. But yeah,
I mean that's an excellent point, because it does come through that I sort of knew the general trend of just normal gland, eccrine gland, sweat gland, then being modified for more nutritive purposes and then being more specialized, as we go along. So, but I felt like your discussion of it was much more nuanced, and like better than a review paper on the whole topic, because you just tell it so much nicer than some review papers, although some of those are nice too.
Right. So. Yeah, there are big review papers on mammary glands. It was funny, actually, on different chapters. I mean, there are some where people write review papers, such as this chap, Olaf Oftedal, the guy who spent 50 years. And apparently he always has a little taste of the milk of the animals he's working on.
Oh, does he? Yeah. Oh, so that's how he knows the whale is fishy?
Yeah. And then other chapters, it was, I don't know, there was sort of, there just seemed to be, those big reviews didn't seem to exist for certain areas, and so those are the harder chapters to write. But I guess I wanted to explore the biology, but I guess I always had an interest in history of science, but I also that really grew the more and more I wrote the book, because it just always seemed an interesting lens to look at the science through. And of course, the mammary gland, as we're talking about it, what Darwin considered to be the greatest challenge to his theory, the St. George Myvert's book that came out shortly after Darwin, he held the mammary gland up as too complex to have evolved via baby steps that Darwin was implying. And so, yes, this historical angle just became something I was very interested in. And and so on top of the evolution of mammals, or the evolution of living life form, there was the evolution of science on top of it, which was always interesting to me, and something I wanted to just get in there as much as I could.
So, well, I did sort of allude to the fact I wanted to ask you, what was your favorite fact? You might have 10, but maybe narrow it down to 3.
What's my favorite?
Whoa.
Oh, you put me on the spot now.
But that's okay, because then if you asked me which was my favorite, I think I'd fail too. I enjoyed so many things about this book.
Whales do not have lips.
That's your favorite, Jeff?
I don't know, but it's one that stuck out, and because there are implications, it was there to support important ideas, but still. And I've known for some time that dogs have imperfect lips, but I didn't realize that whales don't have lips.
Right, yes, hence they have this very thick, muscularly ejected milk, yeah.
I'm providing some cover for you here, and the fact that all of these fun facts have implications and understandings, and why there are no green mammals is not just for fun, even though it is fun.
Yeah.
Perhaps you like the one about crocodiles. I remember seeing that very same program narrated by David Attenborough, in which he talks about how the crocodiles being unable to tear, or being unable to chew, have to tear, and they tear the wildebeest to pieces by spinning around, and it's fascinating, disgusting.
It was. I just kind of knew that the endothermy chapter would begin with that. It was just one of those great sequences, wasn't it? And then he ends it by saying, "And now they settle down and won't eat again until the wildebeest return the following year."
Yeah.
You just think, what? Yeah, and then you discover that sort of shrews need to eat every 4 hours or so, otherwise they starve to death. And so, yeah, but yeah, oh yeah, and then that just feeds instantly into a sort of comparison of the physiology of the two types of creatures.
Maybe instead of interesting, was there a fact that startled you memorably?
Well, so the paperback edition, I've just, I don't know why this one popped into my mind, but so the book started with this whole thing of the scrotum and externalized genitalia, and so that really was the starting point, which was you could sort of draw it on the family tree of mammals, and it sort of said exactly where they evolved, and when, and then you had to think why certain types of mammals didn't have it and others did.
Although it is fun to know that the scrotum evolved twice, as you pointed out.
Yeah. Well, but there's been but then there was suddenly a new paper that came out that said maybe it didn't evolve twice.
Oh,
is that between the publication of this book and?
So it's in the paperback.
Okay.
Study, but it was such a perfect story, and then they went, which is the great thing about great and frustrating thing for scientists about biology and science is that this team in Germany went in and sequenced the genes that control the descent of the testicles, and they found that actually these animals that don't have descended testicles, so elephants and aardvarks and related animals, it was always assumed that it evolved after these African mammals are split off from the Eurasian animals. It turns out those animals have got the genes for testicular descent. They're just broken and they don't work anymore. So suddenly it was like, so it evolved and then they lost it, and so it was just a complete sort of like, that all seems so neat and tied up. And actually, no, we've got to reopen the whole theory because of this new genetic study.
Wow. Well, I might have to get the paperback to get the amended version somewhere in my brain.
I tell you what I did. Favorite facts. I just talking about genetics. Having read all about platypuses and how weird and wonderful they are, and then discovering that they don't have just an X and Y chromosome, they have 5 X chromosomes and 5 Y chromosomes, was just fantastic. It was like, what? How utterly bizarre is that? But then, true to form, these monotreme sex chromosomes play this really integral role in trying to figure out the evolution of sex determination in mammals.
Yeah.
That was a.
It is startling but since you are passing by it, that the X and Y chromosome thing is not universal.
Yes. Yeah, that was another theme in the book, was just having been, there
are a lot of different ways.
20 years, but always in this sort of just sort of taking that wide lens view of evolution, and then there would just be certain things, certain sort of long-held dogmatic ideas of mine, which were just completely blown away very quickly. As yes, X and Y chromosomes only exist in mammals, these particular X and Y chromosomes. Yeah, and then there's just many other ways of determining sexes in other types of animals and plants. So you can have the female can have 2 different sex chromosomes, and the male can have the same 2. And then other animals, it's the temperature at which they develop, which determines the sex of the adult.
This before I mean, in addition to when you told us that 80% of mammals are hermaphrodites anyway. So
mammals, no.
Animals or
mammals? I think animals.
Animals.
One of them.
Animals. Yes, yeah.
I hope it's animals.
Animals.
Like, wow.
No, mammals. No,
that would be a surprise.
I should have looked for my note, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, no, hermaphroditism is across invertebrates. It is very common. And so again, just the idea that you have 2 distinct sexes of everything, the Noah's Ark model, is not true. But it's it's fairly well established for vertebrates. Although of course certain fish change sex as they develop according to social status. There's many different varieties of mechanisms that control
Yeah.
these things.
And how about those hooded seals? I just happened to see that. It's like hooded seals suckle for only 4 days. Well, that's pretty remarkable, because what's the implication of that? The implication is that mother's milk is really not skim milk, and that those seals grow really fast.
Yes. Yeah, they're born at about, I think it's about 28 kilos. I can change football to soccer ball for the Americans, but I'm really bad at changing kilos into pounds. Anyway,
That's okay.
28 kilos. And yeah, they double, but the thing is, so you think, oh, they only suckle for 4 days, but they actually about double in weight in those 4 days. They're taking on about 7 kilos of milk a day. So yeah, I mean, earlier you said, you know, the postpartum energy exchange between mother and young mammal is extreme. So yeah, she has fed up. She's fed extensively, and then it's just this sort of 4 day period of boom, you know, take his milk. Yeah, and you know, the young hooded seal needs that blubber if he's going to survive in the Arctic.
That's true.
Waters. So yeah.
So I wonder, you know, so in school, Jeff will remember too. You don't have to be a biologist to know this, but they make sure mammals give birth to live young. They produce milk. They have hair, and warm-blooded, which we don't try to use those terms anymore. But so, what if we were to change that? What do you think we should say, or is that still relevant and okay to be having 7-year-olds repeat?
Yeah. I mean, I have a 7-year-old downstairs, and she would answer the question like that. So I'm obviously okay with 7-year-olds. Yeah, I mean, I think otherwise it's funny. You know, that's always how we talk about it, and then we can define them sort of phylogenetically as well. Succinctly answering the question is more difficult, but I think you almost have to imagine the sort of it's sort of almost about ecological niches and mammals. I mean, they're high energy, I think, is the key to it. So the endothermy is an essential component of it. It's such a bizarre way of living, just to be sort of burning so much energy and needing to take in so much energy. But it's obviously been successful. I mean, well, I will take a step back on saying that. You know, another thing was that, you know, when I started writing the book, it's like, oh, mammals are everywhere. You know, wild animals are mammals, and then you just come to realize that actually no, there's 5,500 mammals, there's 10,000 species of bird, there's 10,000 other reptiles, there's whatever it is, 26,000 sort of bony fish, and actually if you do it by biomass and you have all these classes like plants, which is 80% of the biomass on Earth, mammals, there's almost as much virus on. There is more virus than there are mammals. If you like weighed all the viruses on the planet, there would be more virus than mammal. So we're not a great success story, albeit there's one species that's us sat here on our laptops conversing across the globe who've done, you know, untold changes to the planet. But it's obviously a successful form of life. So to go back to your question, mammals have sort of created this ecological niche, which was very high energy, warm-blooded, and it involved becoming intelligent, evolving big, expensive brains. But it almost seems like a sort of runaway phenotype that just sort of kept getting more high energy. So the more you could hunt, the faster you could grow, the bigger your brain could be, the more efficient you could be. And so it's quite an abstract.
I think, Joanne, that when I learned that at school, at least, that it was part of a mindset of finding a simple way and of pointing out that humans are unique and the pinnacle of creation and all of these things, or evolution. And I think, you know, listing those three things was thought as an anomaly. It was on the way to finding the one thing that separated us and made us superior to all the other animals. and it just never got there. And I think that's a good thing. And so
That is a good thing.
yeah, I read Liam's book, and it's like there's not a simple answer, and it really trivializes it. There's so much more fun in the richer answer than there is in the, well, humans are the only self-consciously aware animals.
Yeah.
So there, take that.
So, Liam, when we spoke, we did a quick test of the system, and you said you were writing an article about physicists and neurobiologists working together, and I thought, well, here's our resident physicist. Curious if you're able to share sort of what you're looking at these days.
Yeah, and I should have said I'm only just starting to write this interview.
So your thesis is not fully formed, right?
Yeah, no. Watch this space. But I mean, no. So the article that I'm researching is a science of animal behavior, and so this sort of all began in the sort of 50s. With Tim Bergen and things, and they were sort of trying to do a biology of behavior and what behavior was good for. I mean, behavior is like the quintessential thing that makes animals animals. We're not talking mammals, we're talking animals. And they sort of said you have to go out and watch behavior very carefully. So people did this for 50 years. But what's happened in the last 5 years is that people have returned to the field with machine learning and vision, sort of, high density video analysis and sort of automated analysis. And they're looking at animal behavior in a very sort of mathematical way without any of the human biases. So instead of sort of a human watching a video saying, oh, they're hunting or they're, they're scared, the machine learning is picking up modules of behavior. And so they've done this with the nematode C. elegans, which so many people work on, Drosophila fruit flies and mice, and sort of trying to just build it from trying to sort of look at what data you get out of it. And so one of the really interesting studies has mice behavior being made up of 300 millisecond syllables. So it seems to change sort of every 300 or 400 milliseconds. And some physicists have sort of moved into the space. And the one that I spoke to kept saying, this is very early. We don't know what it looks like, but we want to see if we can sort of come up with some laws and some sort of, yes, the thing that physicists do much better than biologists. So the biologists, and there's obviously a rich cross exchange, and sort of a lot of physicists moved into neuroscience over the last 20 years, but now behavior is a distinct thing in and of itself. So the physicist I met who was studying the worms was like, he didn't even really care about brains. He was like, I just want to look at animal movement as a phenomenon in and of itself. See if I can describe it mathematically and then extract principles from that.
It's the way we've learned to view problems, I think, and to look for possible solutions. Is different people. You can learn lots of different approaches, and then different domains tend to adopt a certain pattern, and then it's fun to move from one to the other and see what you can learn from applying a different perspective.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, and also because physicists really love to quantify things.
Yes, you guys do.
Yeah, it is. It's all about, which was one of the, there's an alignment between something that Liam wrote in the book, a footnote, my favorite footnote that had to do with the importance of microscopes and telescopes expanding what biologists can see. And that aligns with the thought I've had for years that every major advance in physics, my domain, came from developing new sensors that could look at something in a different way at a different level.
Right.
And it's basically the same idea. We could see smaller things. We could see colder things. We could measure faster things. We could do brighter things. And each one of those experimental advances is the way I was conceptualizing it, but basically a new way of seeing something led to new understanding. And the same is, it's a very, very scientific sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they're calling this computational ethology. And one of the foundational papers of this field said, do we need to call it computational ethology? Everything's computational these days. But their point was that, yes, we do, because computation and computer advances are allowing us to see behavior differently. It's actually changed. It's a new type of sensor, which is what you're saying. So I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we're
Goodness.
yeah, well, I think it's great. I mean, biology has changed every new technology that comes along. So, you know, the Human Genome Project forced us to create new ways of sequencing. So this could possibly happen in a reasonable way, cheaper way as well. I was wondering, so you were working, you finished your PhD, you were working as a postdoc, you switched over to writing. So obviously to you, it's very important that we are able to share science with the general public. Any general or specific thoughts on that now that you've made this change to writing articles, writing books, rather than just working in the lab and sharing your results with peers?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I always enjoyed doing, and that sort of presenting and communicating my own work. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, with the book, it just felt like a story that I wanted to discover because it felt like a story I hadn't heard before. You know, sort of instead of just sort of how did monkeys evolve into, how did humans evolve from primates? You know, actually taking the previous 200 million years and sort of seeing how we got to where we are. So it just felt like something I felt I wanted to know, and that it was a valuable story that would change our perspective on ourselves. And it might be useful in sort of, you know, in terms of current ecological and climate crises, that actually just changing the way we thought about ourselves and binding ourselves a bit more tightly to nature might help there. So, I mean, it's interesting. I think all writing has a political slant to it. And then, yeah, I mean, I just enjoy. So I've been writing mainly feature articles since I wrote the book. Yeah, it's just always looking for the heart of the story. So, you know, I want it to be science, which I think is important that people should know about, because, you know, in a mature democracy, and these are curious times, but in a mature democracy, you kind of want people engaged with the important technological advances that are going to change either medicine or how we think about ourselves. I've just finished an article on the ethics of brain-computer interfaces, so sort of all the stuff that Elon Musk is getting very excited about.
Yes.
Actually speaking to the ethicists who've dealt with how these things have been used already in clinical settings. And so sort of just trying to start that conversation. So always wanting to sort of have it as a topic which I feel is important, whether it's to patients and families or a wider society. But then whenever I'm doing that, also just always trying to sort of find, you know, this doesn't sound too grandiose, but always trying to find the sort of narrative and how the science developed, and sort of telling stories that way. So sort of, you know, a little bit of a historical edge to it, and just trying to allow people to see how science progresses, so you can see how it's shaped.
Yeah. Well, I actually appreciate that, you know, because a lot of times you're just told, you know, in school, disjointed stories, instead of getting the fuller picture of how these scientists, you know, were either at the same time or not the same time, things like that. So I really appreciate that, and I could see that in here. Not only tied together are the, you know, the development of these traits, but also scientists working on them. So I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Came up a little bit ago when we were talking about whatever it was, and I almost was able to remember the phrase that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And I thought we almost need a phrase in a similar way, because it's hard to write about science ideas without including history. And it's not that strong sense of development and getting better so much as science carries a lot of history with it, because there's deeper understanding in the history that tells you how you got to a place. That's an important lesson, and not just the facts that you end up with.
Yes. And there's that famous quote, I'm not remembering who said it now, but, you know, science progresses one funeral at a time. And I was having dinner with a friend the other day, and I'm not going to name names or any details, but he was just lamenting how there was a very major figure in the field whose ideas for 40 years has shaped that field.
Mhm.
And you know, maybe it's time to move on. I'll leave it at that. So yeah, there are all these factors that go into how science evolves.
Right. Well, I actually see we've been talking for an hour. We're really glad you could be with us, Liam. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on?
No, I mean, I think you said the book came out today, so you know.
Yeah, the paperback, yes. So
not that I'm doing this for the money or anything, but
well, I mean, now I know your book is updated in the paperback, not merely just let's put a new cover on.
Well, there's a whole afterward talking about ecological crises because it was, I don't know, it just became unavoidable in the year after the paperback came out, after the hardback came out. But yeah, so, no, I don't think I have any. It's a pleasure talking to you. It's been really good fun.
Well, everybody, we've had the pleasure today of speaking with Liam Drew about his book, I'm Mammal, the story of what makes us mammals. And it's in paperback now, although I'm holding this hardback. I'll need to get the paperback and read the afterwards and go from there. But Liam, thank you so much for writing such a great book, which, by the way, my evolution and medicine class, which will be, I think, next fall, they will get to read excerpts from this book, I believe, because it's like right up that alley. So it'll be fantastic.
Well,
thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me on, Joanne.
Thank you, Liam, and thanks, Jeff, as always. All right. So we'll see you next time on Read Science.